So I'm Tom Kingham. I'm VP of Engineering and Utilities with CyrusOne. So really interested in how we power these data centers, and the interesting comment in the last panel that power is easy. I can confirm it is not, but perhaps we'll talk about that a little in this session, and also looking at what product we build to suit our customer requirements.
Thanks, Tom. Enrique.
Hi, good evening. This is Enrique. I am a senior advisor at Core Capital. Core Capital is already building 6 AI-ready data centers, and I do agree with you. Power is not easy.
And I'm Mike Crawford, Strategy and Business Development for Rolls-Royce SMR, a small modular reactor technology vendor here in the UK.
I'm going to ask you to get closer to the mic because of the door, guys. We don't hear you. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, because when I prepared this thing, obviously as a lawyer, I see a little bit of this. I'm involved in the sector since 2006, but 20 years ago, 1520 meg was big. 2 weeks ago, I've seen a multiple gigawatt project in a location I won't mention to not reveal any confidential information. So I read a lot, and the big question was, why do we need nuclear power? So I tried to understand the logic behind it and the technicality of the question. Maybe Tom, do you want to take that one?
I think that the answer to that is different in every country you go to. So the interesting insight we heard on that last panel, where we actually don't really have a generation problem in the UK, for example, we have a transmission problem. Whereas in some other countries you'll find that it's more on the generation side that we have that issue. When you layer in some of the regulatory issues that in Ireland nuclear is a no-go, Germany, the decision was made to switch nuclear power off. We're seeing in the US that 3 Mile Island is coming back online. So I really don't think the answer can be a blanket one. It's a horses for courses kind of answer. If I take the UK in particular, because I know that Mike can speak to this much more authoritatively than I can, it's been a really interesting conversation, and there's effort by government to get some of these projects off the ground. And again, going back to the last panel, I really agree that there should be distributed generation, that we really should try to put generation close to the data centers, because that makes the most sense. It relieves pressure on the transmission systems. It enables growth in all of the other areas that need power, rather than data centers thieving it all. But yeah,
so essentially, if I'm trying to summarize, generally speaking, if we set aside the geography issue, we have enough power, but it's not properly transmitted to where it's needed so far. This general idea is still very, very vivid.
Yeah, and let's take Europe as the example, where the cloud availability zones are still the main driver of where data centers are going to go. So naturally, there's a lot more congestion on those transmission systems in those locations. So maybe an SMR can fix it, but it's not going to be the same answer in every location.
Thank you. Maybe Enrique, do you want to speak about Spain, or generally if you have
Yes, for me, Spain is a no-go, because we cannot build anything related with nuclear in Spain right now. So I think it's going to be complicated in Spain, but for sure, I think the AI-powered CPDs, data centers, are demanding lots of energy. So in the long term, we should think about probably supplying them with some kind of SMRs or nuclear energy. But for sure, Mike knows a lot more about it than me.
But for now, you said in Spain it's not allowed. It's impossible.
Right now, unfortunately, it's a not-go, but it may change in the future. Okay. Hopefully.
But in Spain, there is a proportion of nuclear generation.
There's already nuclear today. Yeah, it's new nuclear that's not possible.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Yeah, we are thinking more in closing what we already have, than in building new facilities.
Okay. Maybe Mike, that's a good introduction. So can you please answer the question and also explain to us roughly, without getting into more technicalities, how this works? I've learned about it, but you're the expert, so please explain to us.
Yeah, so I mean, a few of the good points have been covered there, but in terms of one of the main benefits of nuclear, it's green. It's green, clean, and continuous. When we look at that spare capacity, I mean, take that UK example. that spare capacity is gas waiting to be used when needed. So if we're fine, using gas, then you don't need nuclear. Gas and its cheapness over the last several decades is the reason why nuclear's not really taken off the way it could have done a few decades ago. As we head, inexorably towards net zero and the need to, at some point, try and transition away from gas, that's where the need for nuclear comes in. And if you can achieve cost benefits through behind-the-meter co-location opportunities, then all the better. But yeah, I mean, we are asking, companies are having to take bets on what the future power needs are going to be. With nuclear, that's a really long-term bet. But the counterfactual is not a position of no risk where you take no bets. You are betting on the grid, that the grid will have power when you need it in 7 years' time when you get a connection, and that the cost of that power in 7 years and for 10 years after that will be at a value you can afford. So yeah, any decision is a bet, including no decision.
So again, we're touching a lot of interesting points. We're going to get back to them. But just on the technicalities, just briefly, how does that work? Nuclear reactors, an SMR.
Yeah,
Just
so
roughly, for us normal people.
so nuclear power is essentially very energy dense because of the mechanisms for which you're generating that energy. So you can effectively, in a very small footprint, generate huge amounts of energy. Now, lots of safety and security safeguards that need to be put in place. There's heavy regulatory burdens to make sure these designs are safe. That adds complexity, it adds cost. All those things considered, nuclear still has the potential to be a really cost-effective power source. We're looking at LCOEs that are, as of 2 weeks ago when Hornsea 4 collapsed, essentially cheaper than wind, yet continuous, a lower embedded carbon footprint than some of those other sources, certainly than any fossil sources. So yeah, a real lot going for it, but you're generating heat locally is the benefit for data centers. That ability to put these things behind the meter because it's got a small footprint.
So essentially, quite surprisingly, the big argument is that zero carbon emission, so it's super clean. Probably not now we're going to touch the waste disposal topic, because essentially what I read is that you have uranium in small seeds, kernels, and then you have thousands of kernels in a golf ball, and then it doesn't melt, the core doesn't melt, which essentially sort of guarantees that there's no leakage, because the leakage would be very detrimental, is it? So essentially you eat this thing that generates heat, which helps the turbine to function, and then that generates electricity. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. And it's a very stable process. You're running that thing 24/7 at a base load. So, bearing in mind, this is not a singular solution. We think of this in isolation, where you'd have a nuclear reactor and a data center, and they're just sat there together happily in an island. That's not the reality we live in. You're going to be combining lots of technologies. Data center operators will be making contracts with utilities, not with nuclear reactor vendor companies. Those utilities will run fleet, balanced portfolios. They will have wind. In the UK, they'll have lots of wind. They'll have some solar. They'll probably be using gas and certificates, but they'll also be bringing increasingly SMRs into the mix as they become available.
Yeah. Just before we get to the mix, because that's an excellent topic, so the modularity is also one of the big advantages, if I understand correctly, contrary to a big power plant, a big nuclear plant where it takes 10 to 15 years, probably 30 billion, and then once you have it for that amount of power, 1 gigawatt, let's say, whereas a small modular could be 300, for example, and then you build it elsewhere and you assemble it on site. So to your point, Tom, you bring power where it's needed. And then, so this is a major advantage as well, on top of also the stability of the energy that is provided.
Exactly that. I mean, in the physics of nuclear, bigger is better. So we ended up, as we evolved the technology through the 60s, 70s, the reactors got bigger because they got cheaper as a result. Over the last couple of decades, one, we've sort of lost our ability to do huge major infrastructure projects. And two, the size of these designs escalated to a point where they got quite hard to build. And so if you look at what's going on in Hinkley, which is the reactor currently under construction, there's 2 units for over 3 gigawatts of power, and it's huge. that site currently, it has a crane on it that is the biggest crane in the world, not just in the nuclear industry, in the world. So someone designed, manufactured, and we used this crane for a couple of bespoke lifts, one off, and that's it. That's the life cycle of that thing. That's not an economical way to build it. So by doing it smaller, factory mass production at hundreds of scale.
To finish on this phase where I want us all to have the same picture in mind. Right? So you either refurbish an existing 3 Mile Island, or you build something bespoke on site where it's needed. Okay. So maybe now, next to the point you touched, this should be combined with the grid, with other sorts of power on site, like could be gas generated. I don't know. What do you see, guys, or what do you think the future will be in terms of how do you combine this? How will the sites look like? What will they look like, essentially?
So I'll touch on a point that Matthew made earlier on, sorry to pick you out there, about being good grid citizens, that data center has more to perform on the grid than just to be a consumer of power. We have the ability to support stability on grid by investing in co-located generation or to at least locate ourselves close to some other generation. I think when we look at what happened in Spain a couple of weeks ago, we're seeing the need to have more rotating machines or other ways of providing grid stability, which the data center can definitely do. We've got, even just in the current designs, which I know will definitely change over the next few years, where you've got huge batteries against your UPS systems at the data center side, those can be used to help stabilize the grid for against any of those events. We also know that our consumption of energy over a year, yes, it's relatively stable, but of course it has a natural peak and trough over the seasons. So it makes sense that during the winter, when we really don't need very much power, but the demand on the grid is very high, why wouldn't we be allowing some of that extra capacity to go onto local distribution or transmission networks? So I really think that, and again, I think this was a point touched on earlier on, that the data centers have an opportunity with the transmission operators to fix a lot of problems. But at the moment they're being seen, or data centers are being seen as a really sort of teenager pest, that we just put these ridiculous connection requests in for a gigawatt in Slough, and they look at us and go, are you absolutely mad? And I do think that as some of that comes out in some of the reform, perhaps, we are seeing much better engagement from those transmission companies to say, well, what can you, as a consumer, do to help us as a network operator and builder to fix the problem?
As part of an ecosystem, and this is probably true in each and every jurisdiction. In Spain, there's a lot of renewable power. Do you see the same approach? Because the next question is also the public opinion, obviously. I briefly touched the waste topic. There's a lot of fantasy around, well, for some reason, some good reason around nuclear. So how does this pans out? In Spain, I'm half Spanish, so I'm comfortable with, we can be a bit over-emotional sometimes. So how do you measure that in Spain?
I think it's a balance. At the end, we need everything. Green energy is, of course, is very important. We are using it to power everything, and it's working, even if we had a little issue. But it was won in 40 years, so it's probably not that important right now. But at the end, we will probably have to think, look forward to bring back our nuclear energy, at least to give some kind of stability to our network. That's my personal opinion. I think we can do a proper mix of everything.
Like Tom said, just as a combination.
Yeah.
And public opinion is rather receptive, rather fine with this, or are they scared? Full stop.
I would say right now it's changing. And if you open your mind and think it as a whole, not only nuclear or nothing, but nuclear and everything else, people is more open to that. And given the fact of the blackout that we had, I think this is probably helping us in making it better than we already did.
Okay. Thank you. Mike, is there, give us the toughest market for you and the easiest market for you, because you're essentially selling SMRs, no? What's your takeaway here?
Yeah, and we're looking at global deployment for SMRs, and if you take Europe as an example, you've got places in like the UK, all for nuclear, has nuclear history, got an SMR competition that's about to conclude. Places have turned around from being against nuclear and are now supporting it again quite aggressively, like Sweden. You've got countries like Germany where, very difficult, almost impossible to even conceive that they would deploy new nuclear. But actually now, with the latest change of government and everything that's happened over the last 5 years, they're putting pause on the decommissioning program and saying, hang on, maybe that wasn't the best decision. There's a referendum in Denmark at the end of the week to decide if they overturn their ban.
Oh, really?
But essentially, over the last 5 years, all we've seen is a positive trend in sentiment globally, but especially across Europe with what's happened in Ukraine. Energy security is real, and yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I want to underscore here that the alternative for nuclear is not nuclear or renewables. It's using nuclear to displace gas.
Together. So, so you have to do a
decarbonise.
lot of education as well. It's not A or B. It's just that's part of the whole solution. Speaking of solution, it supposes that there's needs. So for more power. Since this morning, I've been quite challenged in my thoughts. Again, I'm calling you Matt because we have a few discussions on the topic, whether or not we need more power, because there are existing ways to reduce the amount of power we need, all things being equal, in terms of using innovation and technology to improve efficiency, or do we really need this? Can we just use that? Is demand for AI is real? The assumption that we're going to need a lot more power, is it real or not? Because that goes along with the topic of nuclear that is supposed to be part of the solution, So that, as a good moderator, I have to ask this question. What's your take on that? Where do we put the cursor, between 100 and 0? How do we assess the required level of power?
So from our perspective, we're seeing that the big power demand is from AI, but that's really only in the US at the moment, from our perspective. And I appreciate that there are pockets of AI deployments around Europe, but we're not seeing it at perhaps the scale that we all got very excited about Q1, Q2 of last year. So the nuclear discussion is much more relevant to the US, where there are very real use cases for incredible amounts of power for some of these training locations and other AI type use cases. But when it comes to Europe and in fact anywhere else in the world, particularly Europe, because our energy costs are so high, it doesn't make sense to be deploying an AI training model which really doesn't generate you any revenue until you start using it for inference. It doesn't make a lot of sense to use that expensive power to do it. So I'm not necessarily seeing the huge demand that we thought we were going to get. And I think that's been validated by Microsoft and Amazon recently with their public announcements of just tempering themselves a little bit to work out where this is best located. But it doesn't take away from the incredible demand that there still is for cloud. And that's why I referenced that the cloud availability zones are where the growth really is going to be. Yet maybe that's a bit more of the sure bet. But we still have massive transmission problems in those locations because we're still looking to build a 100 megawatt data center. It's just probably not going to be the gigawatt data center that we thought it was going to be.
Thank you. Do you want to react to that? How much power do we need for real?
Yes, I do believe that AI is going to demand lots of energy, but not in the short term. So right now, I don't think it's a problem. It will be a problem in the future. And it's not only the demanding power an issue. It's also the footprint and the CO2 policies that we have to meet too in the long term. So if you put everything in the mix, it's we should bear in mind nuclear energy, probably that's my personal opinion.
Thank you. Mike, you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot, right? You're selling SMRs, but you believe in the need for massive amount of power, do you?
Well, I guess from an industry perspective as a whole, we're pretty relaxed because there's only so much nuclear power you could build between here and over the next 30 years. And if you measure that against any scenario for the tech industry, it's a drop in the ocean. So, is demand a tenth of what we thought it might have been? Still huge compared to the markets we operate in. And again, this is just one market for power. There's the need for clean electricity going forward is only going one way, of the electrification of transport, heat, lots of industrial processes. So it doesn't make or break things. If the demand's not quite as big, it's still going to be huge in comparison.
Well, I think your biggest enemy at the moment is the transmission operator, because where you could go and put these SMRs anywhere, is getting the power away from it that's a problem. So the natural co-locator is a data center, because we're going to consume all the power that you can generate. But it's a real problem when you can't meet the population density criteria in West London, unfortunately.
You're bringing an interesting point I was about to ask about, Tom. If we zoom back a little bit, and there's more and more topic around building communities around data centers, how does this fit within a broader community, data centers, housing, businesses, and that's also another possible application for you. You have essentially, I'm just thinking out loud, a small modular reactor and then a whole ecosystem built around that small modular reactor, provided that we're not scared about the technology. That's my point, and you will respond to that at the moment you think appropriate, but that's a big question. How do you think this fits within your strategy, and is this something you're really, really trying to implement already, or is it just data center applications for now?
No, 100% it will be. So again, there's utilities in the mix here. We are a technology provider. We are not the entity that's going to operate these energy technologies. And so combining users, whether that's the grid and lots of distributed users, but using SMRs to deconstrain the system, putting them where it's best to put them. Now, if you stimulate an SMR project with an anchor tenant like a data center, great. But they don't have to take 100% of the power. In fact, they probably won't take 100% of the power. They'll take some of it. They'll take enough to get that project over the line and move it, bring it to a community. But the benefit can extend to existing industries, new industries like clean fuels, or even just communities. I think creating those clean energy hubs. All of our industrial clusters have land that passes the population density criteria. All of those industrial hubs, Deeside may be the exception, but all of the others are places where people would not bat an eyelid if you put up a nuclear reactor. They don't care. They want their jobs preserved. These are industrial hellscapes. Some of these places where a nuclear reactor will be lost in the noise.
Okay, so that's a positive note. So we're gonna get there, and so you're not worried about the safety. So this graphite or carbon, I don't know, you're the expert. Those balls are strong enough to sustain the heat, and they're not going to leak, and then we can properly engage these things in our data center or communities.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just clarify. So what you're talking about is a special type of fuel called coated particle fuel, and the design that we have is a very sort of traditional design where fuel is cylindrical. It looks a bit different.
Oh, really? Okay.
Very safe, goes through the same regulatory process. So we're in the final steps of regulation in the UK. We've just about submitted all the documents to the regulator. It's over to them to review and approve.
Awesome.
But we're on the final step 3 of 3.
So that's a good topic maybe about legislation. How do you, and there's also the geopolitical landscape, let's put it that way. So if I focus around Europe, we may expect Europe to join up and be quite supportive of this kind of initiative, procuring more power for the European continent as a whole to have more means to be stronger, trying to think out loud again. Is this something you factor in your daily activities, or you just totally discard the European move around nuclear and what nuclear can do for the economy?
So from a data center operator's perspective, we would really rather not have to have conversations about how to generate power. we would really like to be able to submit a connection request and receive
Get power. Yeah.
the power. It's only by virtue of that being incredibly difficult to achieve in almost every market that we've become interested in how to generate energy to get our projects off the ground. When you look at a transmission upgrade project taking more than 5 years, and even then it may not be 5 years, it could take a few more. No, this is a finance-based forum. You wouldn't want to sponsor any of those projects where you've
Too
got
uncertain.
it's too far out and too uncertain. So from our perspective, we have to take a little bit more control of how do we make sure that that first commitment to our customer and the rent revenue comes in on the day that we say it was going to. And that means we've got to build some generation.
And this approach is pan-European in the case of
Yeah,
this.
but really the only solution that solves for all is gas. You know, that's not, we have a renewable target to hit. We want to be carbon neutral in 2030. So this doesn't really feel like that's a step forward. That feels like we're taking a horrible step back. But what's the alternative? Because if we slow down on construction of data centers as a whole, our digital step forwards that we've made over the last 15, 20 years is going to slow down. We are entirely dependent on the digital economy. You look at what happened in Spain, and I'm sorry to keep calling it out,
no worries, no
but
problem.
you weren't able to buy anything. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't even go and buy a bottle of water because you didn't have cash, and your till wouldn't be able to accept the cash because it was all digitalized anyway. So it is absolutely fundamental that we can support the growth of data centers, I think. So unfortunately, there's going to be a compromise. If we want to be able to grow at the rate we want to grow at, we're probably going to need to build some generation schemes.
Is battery a good solution? Is it technically okay? Or, because that could be a solution, you know, like new type of batteries, like properly stocking power for a few days or more, just to bridge the gap.
Yeah, but again, if you're in the hundreds of megawatts size site,
It's not enough.
that battery is going to be absolutely epic, and it's expensive. So, unfortunately, the cheapest methodology for generating power that is going to be reliable is a gas engine.
I was going to say that, by the way, this day we were very happy because even if we wanted to go to work, we couldn't.
Enrique, that's too Spanish.
Yeah, it was just a couple of hours, so we had to go for a beer.
Mike, how long does it take to build SMR, and how big is it? Just to give a ballpark.
So too long is the answer, and that's why gas, you know, will form part of the solution. It has to, because there's nothing else. But I think there's a different message to saying, yeah, we're just going with gas now. Net zero, who cares? To we need a transient solution, but we have the way to decarbonise at the end of that. I think that's a different message. It's certainly an easier message for government to swallow and say. So we're looking at the early 2030s. So the UK government is weeks away from placing the first order for 3 SMRs in the UK. For us, that's twinned with orders in the Czech Republic. There was last week the financing decision on a project in Canada. So essentially, probably will be the first SMR project to be built in the Western world, which is by GE Hitachi. So, you know, in a couple of weeks, the projects start to fill the map and SMRs become real, but the inertia of just getting all those supply chains spun up, manufacturing facilities, and going through the learning of those first units, you know, early 2030s is unfortunately the best we can do. It gets a lot better after that because you get that benefit of learning, you get the production capacity ramped up, and you're able to quickly ramp these out. You know, we're hoping to do multiple of these every year, maybe 8, maybe 10, depending on quite how the market shapes out. So for us, that's 4 or 5 gigawatts a year. Still a drop in the ocean in the grand scheme of global energy market, but it's it gets a lot easier as you go down the line.
I heard that there's like currently 20 nuclear plants in construction in China. are these like SMRs or actual nuclear plants? Because that's also on the geopolitical landscape, that's also one of the reasons why Europe and the US would like to catch up quickly.
Yeah, mostly large plants are what you call traditional nuclear. They're doing lots of different demonstrators with different technologies. And in the nuclear landscape, there's a huge spectrum of technologies. Lots of them, going in almost opposite directions. So it's very hard to share learning, supply chains, all that sort of stuff. The technology that will be deployed in any meaningful time frame and in any meaningful scale is the tried and tested, what we call light water reactors. So that's what makes up 99% of all the reactors operating today. And there's essentially two flavors of that: boiling water reactors or pressurized water reactors, which is the type that we have as Rolls-Royce. And effectively, very shortly, this soup of reactor technologies is going to condense around a couple of credible designs that have real projects, real financing.
Proof of concept.
And are investable. I mean, some of this stuff is great on paper, but in no way in hell is anyone ever going to invest in it until someone has backed a demonstrator and you've operated it for 20 years, you've proven it's safe, you've proven it does what you think it does.
That was actually my next question. How easy would this be to get finance? Probably maybe it's confidential, but you probably have had this conversation with your investor. And you guys, have you had those discussions with investors? Because the model is quite singular and there are lots of moving parts at the moment, but it could be a solution, but equally. Do you want to touch base briefly if you can, or we move to another question? Yeah.
For me, as I said earlier on, we're a data center developer and operator. We don't want to run power stations.
Yes.
Yes, we've had conversations around all sorts of different technology, but really how do we get enough momentum in it for somebody else to come in and operate it, prove that we have the demand so that they'll give us the supply.
The reason I'm mentioning this is I'm seeing more and more joint ventures as a lawyer involving power companies and DC operators or pure land players. So if you guys don't do that, some others just are open to team up with sources of power to accelerate. And then it goes along with my current investors or future investors. How do they see the picture? Is it too risky, too early,
So we've got joint ventures underway, like in Japan, we have a joint venture with a power company there, KEPCO. In the US, we have joint ventures with power station operators. But those are slightly different, I think, to what you're alluding to. We're not unfamiliar with those structures, but ideally, we would just put in a connection request and receive.
Get the power. Yeah, got you. That's a very useful answer. Enrique, do you see things differently?
Yes, I was going to say that we as data center operators as well, we are contemplating, we are thinking about it. Especially if you read the news, you can read that big hyperscalers like AWS has signed a contract recently. I think it was with Emery, an American company. Yeah. Microsoft is doing so. And if they are doing so, it's because there is something to do with nuclear energy, probably. But in the context of your question, the thing is that the only place that we can do anything in Europe, I think, is France right now. And outside, let's say, outside Europe, England. So there are not many choices in Europe. So, of course, we are considering partnering with somebody, but it's complex because it may take ages. If you want to build a CPD, a data center, it takes so long. So imagine building it with a kind of SMR, not to say a nuclear reactor as it used to be built in the past. So it's really complex. It takes lots of time at the end. And time is money. So.
And thank you. And Mike, on the financing bits, how do you have those talks with people? Because that's probably a bit expensive assets. So how do you approach the topic? So don't worry. So there's the selling argument, obviously, but the technicalities around for how long, which type of financing, do you have those discussions?
Yeah, so financing is a challenge with nuclear assets. SMRs make it easier because they're smaller and offer the promise that eventually you can move away from government sort of intervention in that. from where you stand, having no SMRs on the field, there is a bit of a market failure there, and that's why government schemes like what the Czechs are doing, what the Swedish are doing through Vattenfall, what the UK is doing through GBN exist to get over that initial hurdle. But even then, in any of those business models, it doesn't need the data center operator to invest in the nuclear power asset. Certainly not own or operate it. Their goal is to stimulate with demand, and that's all it needs. So there's plenty of capital that wants to be deployed into these projects, but they're looking at governments to help solve the risk allocation of those first units until we can prove that yes, SMRs are what they say on the tin. They are better. We can deliver them with certainty.
How do you deal with this lobbying? I mean, you probably try to educate the government, because what I hear here, that's the blocker. When they no longer block the process, then a lot of things are going to unfold and become easier. Do you lobby a little bit?
We engage with the government
to have people be less scared of the topic.
Yeah, I mean, we have a sort of downhill battle really, because the UK has they gave us a grant of 210 million about 4 years ago. That's the largest R&D grant ever awarded by the UK government. They're committed to nuclear power and have been for a long time. The key markets that we operate in are committed to nuclear power and have been. Yes, could there be new markets like Australia, Germany, maybe in the fullness of time? But do we need there to be? Absolutely not. We've got enough on our plate for the next decade. So yeah, it's been a downhill battle, thankfully.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Because I've been told that we are out of time. Do you have any questions, Guy? Yes, one here, please. I don't have any microphone. Choose. Yeah.
So, question for Mike. You mentioned earlier, better than wind, LCOE. What I'm interested, sorry, it's a little multi-part, is how you sort of fit into the landscape. Do you need to run like a traditional big nuclear with guaranteed dispatch, fixed price contract, baseload for the lifetime? How do you see the falling capture rates in renewables or gas with CCS coming?
Yeah, and that's where the advantage lies, because I think the penny has started to drop. The more renewables you deploy, the harder they become to invest, and subsidies have to keep going up. That is the only that's how it will work. Whereas with nuclear, it is a scalable model. In fact, it gets easier to invest. Yeah, I think this is the finance sort of community, so everyone will be familiar that if we don't have an offtake for the power, and we're going to build, in our case, roughly 0.5 gigawatt, well, no one's going to invest in that. So there needs to be a solution for that offtake, or at least a good chunk of that offtake, before anyone would invest in the sort of, albeit small with SMRs, but it's still huge chunks of capital that we're talking about here in the billions.
One is.
So the non-dispatchables then have to keep eating the falling capture rate to keep the base load delivery going, is the economic model.
Yeah, well, we'd be looking for models. Well, we'd have to have models where you're utilising that power all the time. You wouldn't be trying to load follow or anything like that. I mean, you can with the technology. It's just not economically.
And as a ballpark, 300 megawatts, roughly one.
Yeah, we are 470 for our design, but that's by far the biggest. 300 is the typical number for an SMR.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Sorry, I can see you. No? Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.